With Tom Holland's third solo outing as Spider-Man fast approaching, we thought it might be a good time to look back on the most forgotten iteration of the character, The Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2. Andrew Garfield's take on the classic Marvel character might be returning in No Way Home after all, and bringing his love of lasagna and disdain for Mondays with him. Yeah, sorry, I regret that bit already. Anyway, let's take a look back and dig up 25 Easter eggs and little details you probably missed or forgot in The Amazing Spider-Man. Let's start ourselves off with a little bit that The Amazing Spider-Man 2 takes directly from the comics. When Peter clashes with Electro for the first time, he sprays him down with a fire hose. He's even wearing a fireman's helmet, which is a weirdly whimsical choice for these movies, but whatever. This method of shorting Electro out has its origins in The Amazing Spider-Man issue number 9, where Peter rolls out the same trick to deal with the villain after conventional methods of putting him down fail. It's an interesting scene, as well as one that shows off just how versatile and creative Peter is as a fighter. Let's move on to a double hit of references to the comics that spans both movies. In the final web-slinging sequence of The Amazing Spider-Man, there is a prominent shot where the George Washington Bridge appears in the background. The famous bridge, which spans the Hudson River from Upper Manhattan to Fort Lee, New Jersey, is the site of Gwen Stacy's original fatal fall in the comics. Director Marc Webb has gone on record that this is an explicit reference to her impending doom in the sequel. Of course, what's the setup without the execution? The Amazing Spider-Man 2 may have changed the location of Gwen Stacy's death, giving us a complicated sequence in and around a clock tower, but the sequence hides another reference to the comics. As the sequence plays out, the audience is shown the face of the malfunctioning clock tower, which eventually settles on displaying the time as 1:21. Gwen, of course, met her original fate in issue 121 of The Amazing Spider-Man. Now, how about something a little lighter and more life-affirming? In The Amazing Spider-Man 2, Gwen Stacy gets a dog while she and Peter are broken up. And that dog? Well, it's the actual pooch of the film stars and, at the time, real-life couple, Emma Stone and Andrew Garfield. Oh god, now I'm thinking about that poor dog being orphaned. And who's gonna take care of it now? Peter? That guy's a mess. I would not trust him with a goldfish. Okay, this one's actually more fun. In the first Amazing Spider-Man, Peter has a poster up in his room for Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window. Rear Window, of course, is all about a determined photojournalist who has to solve a murder and catch the killer on his own. Oh, now I swear I've heard that story somewhere else too. Something about a dead uncle and a larger than usual amount of responsibility. The transformation into Spider-Man is a time-honored tradition in film, or at least it is in Spider-Man films. It would be weird if there was one in like Star Wars. Not that Disney can't make my fanfiction come true. Anyway, Peter or Miles Morales get bit by that pesky radioactive spider and then it's Mutation City, baby. Getting your DNA rewritten by atomic spider venom is a handy stand-in for puberty, and if you happen to get real tall, real fast as a teen, then you know how much that can hurt. Peter's hazy, freaked-out transformation in The Amazing Spider-Man honors that legacy, but it also hides Spidey's signature symbol on the back of Peter's skateboard as Peter rests on a subway car and gets into a little trouble with some local ruffians. Say what you want about the films, Marc Webb came into these things with a plan. During a scene set in an Oscorp lab in the first Amazing Spider-Man, you can spot a prominently placed photo of a rhinoceros in a holographic display. Webb has said that this was a specific reference to his desire to use the Rhino as a villain in the sequel, even if he did end up being Paul Giamatti in a big robot suit, and not Paul Giamatti as a gigantic CGI muscle man. One of the biggest ideas to come out of the Amazing Spider-Man series was the idea of doing an entire film dedicated to and centering on the villainous Sinister Six. The second film does a lot of the groundwork needed to establish such a project, and it's loaded up with hints and references to the villains who never came, including a hidden sequence set in an Oscorp building where Doc Ock's tentacles and the Vulture's wings are on prominent display. While we never got to see the Sinister Six in action, that scene did still end up being a hint of things to come, as Sony's Spider-Man Homecoming would take the Vulture off the bench a few years later. One of the sad realities of the Amazing Spider-Man films is that they suffer from a profound lack of Jonah Jameson. I mean, come on, he's essential. Far From Home even brought J.K. Simmons back to fill the role again. While the character may never appear on screen, however, his shadow looms large in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And what does such a shadow want? It wants pictures. Pictures of Spider-Man. Thankfully, Peter Parker always delivers. And in one scene, you can spot a bit of an email exchange that he's having with the Daily Bugle's most imposing editor-in-chief. Superhero and villain outfits are a hard sell in movies. What needs needs to be fairly simple and offer a distinct silhouette on a 4-color page, calls for extra details and practical touches on the big screen, and while a guy wrapped up in green spandex with a bright yellow star on his face might seem less outlandish in a post-Suicide Squad world, Electro got a major facelift for his appearance in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. However, in one scene, Max does have a birthday cake that is all done up in the signature comics colors of yellow lightning bolts with green trim. Of course, it's just not a Spider-Man movie without a little visit from our old buddy. No, not Stan Lee. I'm talking about the 1960s cartoon theme. As you might expect, Peter uses the catchy little jingle as his ringtone and whistles it during a fight with the Rhino, which leads us to the question, what is that song called in a universe where Spider-Man is real? Who would write such a thing, and why? Marc Webb's Spider films owe a lot to the comics that inspired them, and while they may make some superficial changes, they still pay service to the source material. Take, for instance, the scene where Peter falls through a roof while he's tailing the guy who shot Uncle Ben. It's no accident that he falls through into an abandoned wrestling ring, a clear homage to the original Peter Parker testing out his powers and trying to win a little money by climbing into the ring. Sadly, there's no bone saw, but he still gets the idea to make his costume from a luchador poster. This one is less of an Easter egg and more of an extended gag across both films, but hey, it still hinges on eggs. In The Amazing Spider-Man, Aunt May asks Peter to grab her some eggs from the store. What follows is a running gag where he forgets them, remembers them, and then gets them smashed in one of his showdowns with the Lizard. And lest we forget that Aunt May has an insatiable hunger for high-protein snacks and good cholesterol, you can also spot an email from her in Peter's inbox in the second film. Her request? More eggs. The lady just loves a good omelet. Here's a quick one that you can miss if you blink at the right moment. While Paul Giamatti's Rhino is making Peter miss his high school graduation, Spider-Man pantses the guy mid-fight. And what's on our villain's boxers? Little rhinos. You know, because he's the Rhino. They can't all be winners, folks. This is also the scene where Peter whistles the Spider-Man theme during the fight, which is pretty slapstick. These movies were kinda goofy, huh? The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is, on top of all the Sinister Six setup, chock full of side characters who could be expanded out into full-blown standards of the comic world, so let's take a look at a few of them. First up is Alistair Smythe, played in the film by BJ Novak. Smythe is an Oscorp employee who goads Max Dillon, aka Electro, into villainy. He also happens to share a name with the guy who went on to be the Spider Slayer in the comics, seeking revenge against both Peter and J. Jonah Jameson for the death of his robot suit-building dad. Next up is Felicia Hardy, played here by Felicity Jones. Hardy makes a couple of small appearances circling the Harry Osborn plot. She also happens to share a name with the talented burglar and part-time Peter Parker love interest Black Cat. Hardy might not steal anything here that we know of, but hey, Gwen Stacy was going to be dead going into the proposed third film, so maybe she was being eyed as a new love interest. Finally, here's a quick one on the character's reference front. During a scene set in the Ravencroft Institute, there's a quick look at a plaque commemorating a Dr. Thomas Warren. Now, the plaque says that Warren died in 1994, but eagle-eyed fans will also know that there is a Miles Warren in Spider-Man lore, the talented genetics researcher who goes on to become the villainous Jackal. It could be a coincidence, but in a film so invested in setting up multiple future villains, that does not feel too likely. This one is both an Easter egg and a fun coincidence. In The Amazing Spider-Man 2, Harry Osborn has a scene where he scrolls through a bunch of files left to him by his father. Eagle-eyed viewers can spot references to Oscorp projects that seem tied to other Spider-Man villains, namely Venom, Morbius, the Living Vampire, and Dr. Octopus. This was probably intended to tie into the third film and proposed Sinister Six movie, but here's the weird part. All three of those guys are appearing in new movies in the next year. Here's one that doesn't rely on Spider-Man lore to appreciate. In the second film, the Ravencroft Institute scenes were shot on location at the State University of New York's Maritime College in the Bronx. Given its history as an academic institution, they didn't have to change a whole lot, but the production did pay respect to the school by putting up a list of distinguished naval officers and graduates on a plaque of prominent researchers who worked at the institute. It's not big, but it adds a nice little bit of believability to the portrayal of Spider-Man's version of Arkham. This one's pretty easy. We already talked about Gwen Stacy's death in issue 121 of The Amazing Spider-Man and how Marc Webb knows his spider lore, so let's take a look at Gwen's outfit at the time of her death, mirroring her comic counterpart from that fateful issue. Emma Stone is decked out in boots, a short purple dress, and a mint green jacket. So, obviously, there was a lot of track laid in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 for the much-discussed Sinister Six spinoff, but here's a reference that you would have to go deeper than the comics for. In the film, actor Michael Massey plays a guy named Gustav Fiers, who meets with Harry Osborn to discuss general villain stuff. Fiers, some of you may know, is also the man who assembles and organizes the Sinister Six in a trilogy of novels by author Adam Troy Castro. Here's one that you might have missed in all of the chaos of the fight scene. In the climax of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, while Electro is dodging Peter, he keeps bouncing around between some gigantic electrical conductor devices. Each one of the conductors plays a different tone when he hits it, and before too long, the movie's big bad is playing a rendition of the Itsy Bitsy Spider to taunt his foe. To quote the man Spider himself, I really hate that song. This is sort of a throwaway reference in the movie, but in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, a news report about Alexei Sitsovich's escape from prison mentions that he escaped from someplace called the Vault. Attentive Marvel Comics fans will know the name immediately as a S.H.I.E.L.D. prison introduced in Avengers Annual number 15 in 1986. It is one of the many Marvel supervillain holding facilities, but this one is specifically built to hold technologically based criminals. A perfect spot to lock up a version of the Rhino who uses a gigantic robot suit. For our penultimate entry, let's take a look at something that required a little bit of work from viewers. We've talked a lot about the cancelled Sinister Six spinoff in this video, but at one point, it seemed like enough of a sure thing that Sony hit a reference to it in the credits of The Amazing Spider-Man 2. During the credits, an Alicia Keys song called It's On Again plays. Viewers who got out their phones and used the Shazam app to identify the song will be treated to a link to a Daily Bugle mock-up page and several different options, including an option to explore a sinister future. Clicking that link would take you to a hidden scene that we've mentioned before, one where Harry Osborn and Gustav Fiers are well on their way to assembling the Sinister Six. Finally, let's close out on what might yet be another reference to Spider-Man's past. During a scene in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, Peter and Aunt May are talking about getting him paid for his work, sending in spider selfies to the Daily Bugle. May seems to think that it's nice that he's getting paid for the work at all, but Peter tells her that the pay would only be considered generous in 1961. This at first might seem like a reference to the year that Spider-Man was introduced, and we think that it was probably meant to be, but the web-slinger didn't make his debut until the August 1962 Amazing Fantasy number 15. Perhaps it was intended to be a reference to that date, or the development period of the character, or maybe it was just a flubbed line on Andrew Garfield's part. Are you still here? Okay, bonus round. Just one more. These facts, they are just like potato chips. I just can't stop. Now, before we go, let's do one little joke that probably got a laugh out of older fans while sailing right over kids' heads. We all know the words to the old Spider-Man cartoon theme. All that enthusiastic talking about doing whatever a spider can as though spiders fighting crime, trying to maintain a good work-life balance, and experiencing the sad realities of aging into adulthood is one of the most natural things in the world. Anyway, during a conversation with Dane DeHaan's rendition of Harry Osborn, Osborn talks about Peter getting the positive effects of the genetic recombination experiments that were supposed to save his father's life instead. He even goes so far as to tell him that he can do everything that a spider can in a fun little nod to the song. And there you go, 25 bits and pieces of spider lore from the Amazing Spider-Man films. Even though this version of the character wasn't the biggest hit with fans, these films were still clearly made with a lot of care and love for the original comics. And hey, maybe we'll be seeing him again soon.